Benzie in the closet. Alina's guest. The way of halflings. Benzie started, arrested from sleep by the sound of a table dragged across the hardwood floor. He wiped the drool from his face and brushed crusty sediment from his eyes. Faint firelight emanated from under the closet door, allowing him to make out shadows of his surroundings. Alone, Benzie Fernbottom huddled against the back wall of a narrow supply closet beside a mop and tin water pail. Listening, Benzie didn't hear any voices, but he did hear Alina's footfalls as she went back and forth to the kitchen. Benzie delightfully felt the radiating warmth of the Inn's oven and smelled baking shortbread, caramelized sugar, toasted flour, and berries. Benzie broadened his legs to rest his chin on his knees and taking time to think things through, became increasingly anxious. Spying on Alina was poor judgment, and he hoped he could simply lie low and wait out the consequences of his bad decision-making. Alina Hogsbreath prepared a tea service, expecting a midnight visit from an old friend. The comforting aroma of chamomile leaves and ground vanilla wafted from her stoneware teapot placed in the center of a hawthorn serving tray, accompanied by 2 delicate teacups and saucers, 2 small plates, 2 sieves, and paired eating utensils. 2 hot lemon blueberry scones, fresh from the oven, were joined with ramekins of chilled clotted cream, warm honey, and more than an ample helping of red currant jelly. 3 stalks of dill were laid across the teapot. Lifting her tray, Alina exited the kitchen. Pausing, she slightly turned and stomped her foot, blowing out all of the kitchen candles instantly. Alina was a hedge witch, trained in kitchen magic by her mother, whose mother was trained by her mother by hers, and so on. Historically, halfling women like Alina lived in the hedges, spaces beyond the boundary of farms and villages. In the thickets, on the fringe, and used their knowledge of plants, herbs, and food to aid their communities. They acted as scries and fortune tellers, caregivers, protectors, and healers. Hedge witches were not book-learned wizards trained in the formal aspects of magical arts or alchemy, nor did they fully understand how their magic worked. Rather, their magic was passed down through songs, folklore, artifacts, and recipes. To witches like Alina, cooking and cleaning were part of their art. They wove emotion and willful intent into simple, everyday acts of service. Entering the tavern, Alina passed the bar to approach a square table sheet centered on the fireplace. 2 chairs sat across the table from each other at opposite sides. Alina's chair faced north, her guest's chair faced south. The cozy, flickering glow of the fire offered warmth and ambience, casting shadows along the wall. Minding her footing, careful not to disturb the faint outline of a chalk circle surrounding her chair, she set her serving tray on the table. Alina's chalk circle had 2 borders with 5 rooms marked between them with a single southward-facing triangle drawn in its center. It was a symbolic ward, 2 borders protecting 2 spaces, guided by 5 life-affirming ideas, filled with feminine power. Leaning against the hearth next to Alina's chair was a ratty pinewood broom. The crooked handle still wore its bark, and its head was made from dry, crispy branches of an ash tree, fastened by twine made of pure silver. And the sour face of a monk, his eyes upturned, and mouth gaped open as if in prayer, was carved into the handle's center. Alina wearily removed her cooking apron to fold it over her chair's backrest. Taking her seat, she brushed errant strands of hair from her eyes. Taking the dill stalks, she wove them into a crude bracelet before sliding it over her left wrist. Finally, she poured herself a filtered cup of tea and helped herself to a scone. It was then the flames of the fire bellowed as if fanned by a stiff wind, and the ghostly form of Rimmelled Fickle-Thicket rose from the floorboards to settle into the chair opposite Alina. And without batting an eye, Alina poured the apparition some tea with her left arm. "Rimmelled," Alina said with a kind smile. "Why look well?" A halfling, Rimmeld's face was gaunt, wrinkled, and pale, crowned by a flurry of floating gray hair that blackened at its tips. Her garments, not only her hair, were equally untethered by gravity. She was dressed in a long-since-forgotten fashion, wearing a comfortable, homey evening gown over a white blouse, with a delicate gold locket and chain draped about her neck. Her ghastly eyes harbored frightful, narrowed pupils, and her left arm tremored from palsy. Slowly, Rimmel leaned toward the table to imbibe the delicious smells of the living. "Scone?" Alina asked, cutting one open to smear it with clotted cream before adding a thick jelly layer. Glaring spitefully at Alina's dill bracelet, Rimmel's eyes softened and longingly followed the pastry. Taking a crumbly bite, the ghost moaned, and her eyes rolled in elation. "It's good seeing you again," Alina said gently and with a pleasant, cordial smile, sampling her own scone. Rimmel Ficklethickett's expression angered to stare at Alina with rising contempt. Benzie strained to listen, going so far as to put his ear against the door. He was confused. After taking her seat, out of the blue, Alina started talking. Benzie recounted what he knew on his fingers. First, the heavy round door to the inn hadn't opened. Second, nobody descended the stairwell from the upstairs suite. Third, footsteps leading from the back door didn't traipse past the service closet. It was dark, and Benzie naturally couldn't see his fingers, yet Alina was most certainly conversing with someone in the tavern. Someone who wasn't there. Growing more befuddled, Benzie frowned when hearing Alina make small talk. Alina complimented her guest's locket. She insisted on how the earthy, fall colors of their gown were so appropriate and matched her guest's eyes. And she remarked on how beautiful the weather had been today and inquired about the conditions they encountered on the road. "Road?" Benzie internally questioned, madly gripping his hair. "Nobody's here." Unable to really take it any longer, Benzie carefully reached above him to quietly twist the knob to crack open the door. Finding the hallway suitably dark to remain unseen, he quietly left the closet and, crouching, sneaked behind the bar. Peering out to look toward the fireplace, Benzie went wide-eyed and threw his hand to his mouth to capture a terrified gasp. "Have I given it more thought? Leaving?" Alina pensively asked, finishing her scone. Rimmel stared angrily into a space beyond Alina and whispered deathly, "I want to go home." "Yes, dear," Alina said, wiping her lips with a napkin. "I know." The ghost's eyes drifted to Alina. "My husband? Milton? He's not here, dash." Rimmel snarled, hissing, "Where is he?" "Long departed for the green fields, I'm afraid." "Take me to him," Rimmel insisted. Her teeth were wicked and sharp. Alina shrugged and looked sternly at Rimmel. "I can't, dear." Grumbling, the ghost reached for her tea and brought the cup shakily to her nose. She inhaled to remember a distinctly mortal sensation. After sipping the tea and returning the cup to the saucer, Rimmel looked to the floor and whispered, "I want to go home." Alina put her hands into her lap and, with an expression of genuine concern, said, "Rimmel, your home's burned to rotten soil long these 80 years. You've nothing left to go home to, which is why you're here, and why you haunt my inn." Confronted by the blatant acknowledgement of what she was, the ghost growled, and the table heaved and shook violently. Alina's chair, however, remained absolutely still. Her clothes waving in an unseen wind, the specter's body rose to hover menacingly above the table. Rimmel's wispy hair drifted as if she were underwater, her expression turned indignant, and her voice escalated into a shrill scream. "Why do you keep me here?" Alina smiled cordially and reached to pour Rimmel more tea. Lashing out, the ghost's good hand went to rake Alina's living tissue with her elongated, jagged fingernails, but hesitated upon sensing the dill bracelet. "Oh, you're more than welcome to go," Alina shrugged. "You've just chosen not to." "Where is my husband?" the ghost snarled, her translucent form looming over the table. "He must come home." Alina nodded and tried to move the conversation along. "You died in a fire, Rimmel, and at midnight on the anniversary of your death, you've always returned here, looking for your sweet Milt in my tavern. You've haunted my grandmother and my mom," Alina said dourly, and taking a sip of tea, added, "and now me." Throwing her arms back in rage, the ghost's otherworldly presence flung her chair out to bash into the wall behind her, and the fire roared and crackled, blasted by a gale of deathly wind. Nonplussed, the table still stomping and rattling, but she and her chair utterly unaffected by the apparition's temper tantrum, Alina sipped her tea and confessed, her eyes lowered to the table. "None of us felt right about your appearing regularly on your lonesome. yelling into the bar for Milton and waking the guests. "So it's been our way these 80 years to expect you. It was a lifelong promise I made to my mom, and she to hers." "Milton," the ghost wailed, reeling in a circle, her gaze going to the suite above, then panicked, to the kitchen. "Milton, come home. I need you. We figured you were as much a part of Ponderoak as anybody else, and that's why we've tried to help you, all these years. Milton." Throwing her good arm out wide, Rimmel smashed the tea service from the table, sending it crashing to the floor. The ghost howled at Alina in an unearthly sound like metal forks dragged against stone. "You must decide to leave, you must will it," Alina said, and oddly calmly, addressing Rimmel as she might a rueful child. "You must go find Milt somewhere in the green fields, for he is not here." Screeching, the poltergeist gripped the table to furiously wrench it away from Alina, but it was stuck as if nailed to the floor. Yanking, pulling on it with all of her might, Rimmel wrested it ragefully from its sticking point, shattering its surface into wooden fragments she sent sailing across the room to smash into the bar. The table's two legs, still within the confines of Alina's circle, remained solid and still, queerly upright and unbroken. And that's when Benzie Fernbottom dashed into the tavern to defend Alina with a mop. "Benzie!" Alina gasped, sitting upright in her chair. "Get back, you horror!" Benzie bravely threatened, standing beside Alina and shoving the working end of the mop at the enraged specter. Remilled Ficklethickett's ghostly eyes recessed, succumbing to an empty darkness found only far below the earth. Her form twisted to rise above Benzie and manifest fully as a vengeful ghost. Her back pressed against the ceiling, remilled skin ripped away in a flaky ash cloud to reveal a skeletal, withered face. Her claw-like hands opened, and her teeth became sharp, rotting. Her body was blackened from fire, and her evening gown transformed into tattered, burned cloth that whipped behind her in an unseen wind. She exhaled a fierce, terrifying scream, for, at once, she recognized Benzie's unprotected, living flesh as sustenance. Grasping the handle of her broom, Alina took to the floor. Upon contact, her feet and the sliding of her chair destroyed her protective circle, and the two erect table legs fell uselessly to the floor. And the ghost reeled in an exquisite moment of joy, sensing Alina's safeguards and barriers had been removed. "Get behind me, Benzie," Alina commanded, throwing herself in front of him, and she swiftly started to sweep the floor. Alina's sudden lunge sent Benzie off balance, and he stumbled backward to land on his side, dropping the mop. Instantly, as the broom's bristles touched the floor, the monk's head along the handle animated, its eyes shot open with a brilliant radiant light to recite a holy prayer in a deep, unyielding voice. Sweeping under the ghost, every whisk of the broom's ashwood branches ignited burning, drifting sparks, birthed flashes of searing bursts of light, and sent hot embers rushing into the air. Alina grunted, asserting herself forward to push Rimmel back, and the ghost recoiled, screaming horrifically as portions of her essence were swept away from the mortal realm. Frantically sweeping the floor, Alina barked, "Benzie! When I say, you run. Run to the kitchen." "What is happening?" Benzie shouted above the baritone of the chanting monk, struggling to his feet while collecting the mop. Assuming a fighting stance, he jetted the head of the mop out and prepared to swipe at the ghost. "I'm not leaving you to this monster, Alina." "Benzie!" Alina growled, glancing back at him as she continued to sweep the floor to corral the ghost into the corner. "Do as I say. Go to the kitchen. Now." Scrambling from behind her, Benzie dropped the mop and darted for the hall. Growling, snarling, starving, the ghost's toothy maw widened, and her arms extended to flail desperately at Benzie as he fled. "Rue!" Alina grunted, once again putting herself between the ghost and Benzie, to thrust the bristled head of the broom up at the creature like it was a spear. Puncturing the ghost's body, Rimmel writhed and crumpled in pain, and behind her, the tavern's windows exploded to send a shockwave of glass out onto the porch. All the while, undaunted, the monk relentlessly, faithfully, continued reciting its holy prayer even while the ends of the broom's branches caught fire. Benzie hollered a rousing retreat customary to evilorn halflings scared out of their wits and bolted for the kitchen. Furiously swiping the fiery end of the chanting broom to and fro, the creature writhed and cowered, its palsy tremors returned. Screeching, Rimmel diminished under the might of Alina's sweeping broom until there was an implosion. All of the air was sucked from the tavern, instantly snuffing out the fireplace and the flaming broom, ripping dishes, papers, and glassware from nearby shelving. Drawn by the vacuum, a shower of debris flew toward the corner, as did Alina, who was pulled off her feet to crash headlong into the wall. And everything went black. Alina stirred. She saw glaring, flared light. Alina? Soft, early morning sunlight illuminated the ruined hall. Alina winced from the pain digging under her forehead. She used her hand to shield her eyes. Squinting, she found Benzie, armed with a more ordinary, everyday broom. Dumping a dustpan of smashed glass, wood, and plates into the tin pail. Alina's head was elevated with a pillow, and her body was covered with a blanket. Benzie worked through the night to pick up the place, but the tavern, with its shattered windows and broken furniture, would require many repairs. Glancing to her left, she saw that the mud broom lay quietly on the floor before the hearth, singed but not entirely destroyed. Benzie handed Alina a glass of water. "Drink this, easy now, easy," Benzie encouraged, and Alina sipped at the water. Swallowing, she wiped her palm over her eyes and groaned, "Benzie dash." "Yes, yes," Benzie said, fluffing her pillow and starting in on a well-rehearsed speech. "Before you cut me open to read my entrails, please know that I made a very stupid, very grave mistake, and I dash." Alina waved him off and slowly sat up. "Stop it, Benzie. Stop." "Right, yes, silence is good," Benzie acquiesced and promptly shut his mouth. Looking about miserably, Alina shrugged and gestured to the entirety of the destruction. "Well, Benzie. There. You asked. This is why I shuts it down." Benzie nodded. He was determined to remain tight-lipped as possible, fearing what Alina might do if she was actually mad. "But I promised ye an introduction," she said, attempting to bring herself to her feet. Benzie helped and held her arm. Alina nodded and considered, maybe something a bit less dramatic? Benzie had to fight his good sense to reply, "What do you mean?" "Come on," Alina said, wobbling, and pressing her hand against her head, continued, "Grab them supplies. Let's go pay a visit to Rimmel, on the edges of town, bordered by a grove of hawthorn trees. Dozens of gravestones met the rising morning sun in Ponderoak Cemetery. They were modest things, crafted from stone, and bore kind words, phrases, and remembrances to honor those they identified, but they were all well tended. As structurally sound as the day they were planted, solid and proud." Wandering into the grove, Alina introduced Benzie to Milton and Rimmel Fickelthicket. Together, they worked to brush away the dirt and scrub the moss from the couple's headstones, rooted weeds from the soil, and replanted colorful flowers along their edges. "It's a pleasure," Benzie said as if meeting someone for the very first time. The sunlight beamed behind him as he traced the lettering on Rimmel's marker with his fingers. It was their practice, halflings, to constantly remember their dead, to always remain near the resting places of family and loved ones. Never abandoned or forgotten, the living diligently cared for the departed long after they left for the green fields, never missing a chance to visit, to memorialize them on anniversaries and birthdays. It was well known that all halflings everywhere did what was necessary, whatever they personally could, and whatever that might entail, to help the earthbound spirits of their dearly missed find their way home. "Maybe next year," Alina sighed, joining Benzie in placing a remorseful, comforting hand on top of Rimmel's grave.